In this video, we're going to look at extracts from 2 example student responses to question 6 on our Eduqas style English language component 2 paper. Remember, you can press pause at any time if you want to make notes or give yourself a bit longer to read through what's on screen. So the question we'll be looking at here is, both of these texts are about P.T. Barnum's circus and acts. Compare the writers' different attitudes and how they get their ideas across. It's worth 10 marks. Before you begin to answer the question, you need to make sure you've decoded it accurately by highlighting the key words. This question is pretty straightforward as the bullet points aren't too specific. Essentially, you're looking at the content and language within the 2 texts and comparing them. Easy. Now let's take a look at part of student A's response first. Press pause now to give yourself time to read it through, and press play again when you're ready. Okay, so straight away we can see that this student is missing an overview, which would immediately demonstrate their understanding of the 2 texts and their ability to compare. Also, they don't use linking statements. For example, they could have written, both writers mention how acts are taken advantage of. They do manage to compare regardless, but a linking statement like this would give them and their examiner a clearer focus. What they do make clear to their examiner is which text they're referring to throughout their response. The first comparison is successful, as their points do link and they explain what their evidence suggests or reveals about the writer's attitudes. The first text is disapproving of Barnum's behaviour, whereas the second shows that Barnum is oblivious to recognise what he's doing is wrong, so they would be rewarded for this response so far. Up to this point, student A addresses the first bullet point of the question well, the writer's different attitudes. It's from this point, though, that they begin to lose focus. They mention the types of acts discussed in each source, but this doesn't address the question, or at least they don't make it clear to the examiner how it does address the question, since there's no explanation to accompany the first point. The second point, however, does explain and shows Barnum's attitude, as he is the writer of this piece. As a result, this pupil's response would be awarded a mark in Band 2, roughly 3 or 4 marks out of 10. Now let's take a look at an excerpt from student B's response and see how they approached the same question. Press pause now to give yourself time to read it through, and press play when you're ready. So far, student B's response is strong, and so would receive a Band 3, around 5 or 6 marks out of 10. Remember though, this is just part of their response, and we're only awarding marks for what you can see. Quite clearly, they understand how to compare 2 texts, and if they continued the rest of the response in the same way with additional new points of comparison, they'd likely receive marks in the top band. Throughout their response, student B uses a clear structure. They begin by introducing their answer with an overview of the 2 texts, like you should for all 10-mark questions. They outline which text they're referring to using the author's names. They explain how the comparisons are presented within each text, and to support their arguments, they use evidence from the texts. Some of the evidence they've used here has also appeared in previous answers we've looked at, as it was relevant for previous questions. Luckily for student B, some of the same pieces of evidence are correct for this question, which has saved them time. Following this, they explain what their evidence suggests, and sometimes, and where appropriate, comment on the writer's language choices. Finally, they use comparative connectives to indicate to the examiner whether they're going to address similarities or differences. We'll leave it there. Hopefully you can see the difference between the 2 responses. It's always a good idea to get some practice in before the exam, so why not have a look at the Eduqas style component 2 paper attached to this pod, and see if you can find any more links between the 2 texts, looking at the writer's attitudes and how they get their arguments across. Good luck!